Hi, I am Clara, and when I was 10, my parents dumped me at my grandfather's doorstep, vowing to return. They lied. 12 years later, they crashed his funeral, not to mourn, but to snatch $53 million, 0 cents, scheming to frame me as a fraud to steal it all. I had a pen, a letter, and a secret recording that shattered their lies in court. I sat in the back seat of my parents' car. I wasn't scared. Not exactly, just quiet. The kind of quiet where your stomach tightens, and you don't know why yet. We passed the familiar mailbox that marked Grandpa Harold's property in Augusta, Maine. Dad didn't turn off the engine. Mom didn't reach for the door handle. She turned around instead. "You're just going to stay here for a little while, okay?" she said. "We need some time to think." I blinked at her. "Think about what?" "We just need a break, that's all." "Don't make a scene," Mom hissed, her eyes cold. I nodded because that's what I always did. I was 10. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't cry or beg. I didn't think I needed to. I opened the car door and stepped onto the gravel. The door slammed shut behind me. I turned around in time to see Mom and Dad muttered something under his breath. Shifted into reverse, and the car rolled back. "Wait," I said, stepping forward. "Wait, they didn't stop. Mom, Dad." I stood there, frozen, watching the taillights flicker, then fade down the road. They didn't look back, not once. Then the front door creaked open. Grandpa Harold stood in the doorway. His face didn't look surprised. "I figured they might do this," he said quietly. I didn't answer. He walked down the steps, knelt beside me, and, "Come on, let's get you inside." I followed, but I kept glancing back toward the road, hoping the brake lights might flash, hoping they'd realized a mistake. Nothing. Inside, Grandpa sat across from me, quiet. I took 2 bites of mashed potatoes before pushing my plate away. He didn't ask questions. That night, he showed me to a small bedroom down the hall. "You'll be okay, kid," he said. I curled into the blanket. The next morning, I sat on the porch after breakfast. I waited. The days blurred together. By the end of the week, I stopped asking Grandpa if they'd called. By the end of the month, I stopped expecting them to. That fall, in 2001, I started school with a new backpack and a new address, and eventually I stopped checking the driveway every 10 minutes, but I never stopped wondering. Now, 12 years later, in 2013, I stood at Grandpa Harold's funeral, wearing a black dress. I didn't bring flowers. I brought silence. The church was packed with townspeople, colleagues, neighbors, and strangers who'd shaken his hand at county meetings in Augusta, Maine. Someone handed me the funeral program. I froze. Under his photo, the name of the granddaughter listed for the reading, Amelia Stone, not Clara Bennett. They paid the printer to change it, a whisper reached me. But I wasn't so sure. Typos don't happen on the front page of a eulogy. Typos don't replace a name that no one ever said out loud after the age of 10. I didn't correct them. I walked to the front, sat in the second pew, and stared at the podium. They'd already started rewriting me. 12 years ago, they'd left me on a porch and drove away. Now they were erasing me with ink. I stared at the name printed under my grandfather's photo and realized they had already started rewriting me. I didn't blink. They walked in like they owned grief. Lorraine was Benjamin, wore a black suit. They hadn't stepped foot in Augusta for a decade, yet there they were. I gripped the misprinted program tighter. My heart picked up speed, but my body didn't move. I was stuck back in the driveway at 10 years old, watching the rear lights of their car blur into the dusk. That same chill of disbelief pressed into my spine now. Except this time, I wasn't clutching a stuffed rabbit. I was clutching rage. They saw me. Of course they did. And they came anyway. Lorraine reached me first, whispering my name like it still belonged to her. "Clara, sweetheart. We came as soon as we heard." "We've missed you," she lied, her smile venomous. She placed a hand on my shoulder. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn. I didn't give her the performance she was fishing for. Benjamin followed. "Harold was a complicated man," he muttered, "but he loved you in his own way." That last bit was sharp. He didn't say, "We loved you, just Harold," singular past tense precise. But Lorraine had already pivoted like she hadn't just abandoned a daughter for a decade. Benjamin sat beside her. The Reverend stepped up to the pulpit. If anyone close to Harold Bennett would like to say a few words, now's the time. I opened my mouth, I really did, but before a syllable could form, Lorraine rose. Rose. She stepped forward. My father wasn't perfect, she began, but he taught me loyalty. The air left my lungs. Loyalty? He was a man of integrity. Stern, yes, but full of conviction. He taught me to always stand by your family, no matter what, a lie draped in pearls. He taught me the importance of forgiveness, she continued. I may not have been by his side in recent years, but not a day passed that I didn't think of him. Not a day passed. I thought of all the days I'd sat at that kitchen table with Grandpa. Birthdays, science fairs, days I bled on the school track, days I graduated, days I begged for an answer. I never once heard her name. Lorraine, I hope he knew I loved him and that he passed on his spirit of grace to those he left behind. There it was, the closing note of her revisionist symphony. People who didn't know better, people who didn't know me, who didn't know her. I sat stone still because inside me something was cracking. I didn't shout. I didn't leap to my feet, but I wanted to. Oh, I wanted to scream until the stained glass shattered. But then I caught movement to my right. Nathan Wells, Grandpa's lawyer, sat near the aisle, his frame calm, composed. He didn't clap, he didn't blink. He met my eyes and gave a small nod. I waited until most of the crowd had trickled out. I didn't speak to anyone, not even Nathan. I just walked. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I stood still for a long second, my fingers still curled around the funeral program with the wrong name on it. Amelia Stone. That wasn't me. That was who they wanted me to be. Someone forgettable. I moved through the hall slowly. My feet carried me to the room that used to be mine. I sat down in the desk chair. The top drawer stuck a little, just like it always had. I jiggled it and it gave way. There, sitting exactly where I remembered, was the pen. Walnut wood, hand-carved. I had waited 3 years ago in 2010. He'd handed it to me one morning I'd been 18, fuming about a history teacher who docked me points for being argumentative. Grandpa just smiled and slid the pen across the table. Someday, he said, you'll use this to settle something people tried to steal. They're planning to take it all, he warned, his voice low. I had no idea he meant everything. That same morning he grew quiet, then he said it. They tried to have me declared unfit, you know. I remember looking up from my coffee. Who did? Your parents. He didn't sound angry, he sounded tired, the kind of tired that comes from watching the people you love lie with a straight face. They brought a doctor, a lawyer, told the court I wasn't managing my accounts, said I was too old, too confused. Were you? I asked softly. Not to be cruel, but because I didn't know. He looked at me with eyes that didn't flinch. No, I was angry, and that made them uncomfortable. That was the first time I saw him as something more than just Grandpa. That was when I saw him as a man who'd had to fight quietly for his own name. He didn't go into details, not then. He just reached over, tapped the pen and said, now. In the quiet of this house, I remembered that sentence like it had been etched into my spine. I turned the pen slowly in my fingers, then looked under the desk. I pressed the pen's base into the groove. It clicked. The drawer beneath my knees slid out, revealing a stack of documents, envelopes, a flash drive. My breath caught. I reached for the top folder. Inside were notarized affidavit, medical records, a full psychiatric evaluation conducted independently. It read in part. There were copies of letters. I opened the next folder. More documents, more layers, each one confirming what Grandpa hadn't been able to say outright. They had tried to take everything from him, not just the house or the land, but his identity, his legacy, his control over what he built. And they failed because he'd planned for them. I stared at the flash drive. I hadn't plugged it in yet, but somehow I already knew there would be audio, maybe video, a recording of some meeting they never thought he'd keep, or something worse. I leaned back in his chair. They didn't just leave me, they tried to erase him, his memory, his name. And yet, he left breadcrumbs. Not for the world, just for me. I looked up at the ceiling. You planned for this, didn't you? I knew they'd betray us both, his voice echoed in my mind. I let the pen rest on the desk right next to the open drawer. Then I reached for my phone. The pen didn't just open a drawer, it opened the truth. And now I had no excuse to stay silent. The next 72 hours passed like water under ice. I didn't sleep much, but the morning Nathan told me to meet him outside the Augusta courthouse in June 2013. He stood on the steps waiting. When he spotted me, he didn't wave. He just offered a slow nod and walked down the steps to meet me halfway. I blinked. She's saying he had dementia? Nathan's smirk was thin. Stage 3. According to their documents, he thought he was still living in 1975 and called you Evelyn. I stared at him. That's my aunt. She died before I was born. They didn't bother to do their homework. But we did. Inside the courthouse, we were led to a private consultation room. The probate clerk held a file in one hand, and Ms. Bennett, Mr. Wells, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett have submitted the petition. You have 20 minutes to respond before we escalate this to hearing. Nathan didn't flinch. He opened his briefcase. We won't need 20. Lorraine and Benjamin sat across from us. Benjamin avoided eye contact. Nathan pulled out a manila envelope and laid it flat in front of the clerk. This is the last will and testament of Harold Bennett, filed under seal on September 15th of last year. It names Clara Bennett as sole heir and executive of all holdings including land, property, and remaining assets. Witnessed, notarized, filed before the alleged cognitive decline. Lorraine let out a breath. He was confused, she spat. He didn't mean that. She's barely out of high school, for heaven's sake. He didn't even understand. He understood, Nathan said sharply, cutting her off. Then he reached back into the briefcase and pulled out the flash drive. This will make that clear. The clerk nodded and inserted it into a laptop. The sound played through September 22nd, 2012. Grandpa's voice began. This is Harold Bennett. I'm recording this in full knowledge and clarity of what I'm doing. He sounded steady, clearer than I'd heard him in months. Every word was laced with intent, no shakiness, no hesitation. I know my daughter and her husband believe I've lost control, that I no longer deserve to decide where my work goes. But let this stand as my final declaration. I forgive them, but I will not enable them. I've watched them lie to the people they claim to love. I've watched them abandon my granddaughter like luggage at a train station. If you are hearing this, it's because they tried again. And I told Clara to wait. My eyes stung, but I didn't blink. Across the table, Lorraine looked like she'd been slapped. Benjamin just stared at the speaker. When the audio ended, then the clerk closed her folder. The petition is denied. Lorraine's jaw tightened. On what basis? On the basis of a legally binding, authenticated, and time-stamped will, a corroborating recording, and the absence of credible medical disqualification, the clerk replied. Effective immediately, Miss Bennett assumes full executive authority. All objections are sealed unless escalated through formal appeal. Nathan stood calmly and extended a hand toward me. You're officially emancipated from both your parents and their shadows. I didn't take his hand. I stood on my own. I didn't say anything until we reached the bottom of the courthouse steps. That's when I heard heels behind me. Lorraine, you think this makes you someone? She hissed. A piece of paper and some lawyer tricks. I turned to her slowly. No, I said, keeping my voice low. It makes me someone he trusted. And that's enough. You'll never outrun us, she snarled, eyes blazing. She opened her mouth again. But I didn't wait. Nathan and I continued walking. He leaned toward me. There's something else. Something Harold didn't want filed with the will. I stopped. What is it? He raised an eyebrow. Let's just say this wasn't only about inheritance. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of their shadows. I was standing where the light hit first. I didn't even turn on a lamp when I got back to the apartment. I sat on the edge of the couch for a long time. That was when I saw it. On the counter, a manila envelope. I opened it slowly. Inside, page after page of accusations, undue influence, manipulation of a vulnerable elder, aggressive interference with familial legal rights, and then tucked behind the typed papers, a handwritten note in my mother's familiar cursive. "You've made your point, Clara. Now stop embarrassing the family." I stared at that sentence for a long time. "No, we love you. No, we want to talk." Just image management. Just shame wrapped in calligraphy. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in another courtroom across from my parents' new attorney. He paced as he spoke. This young woman manipulated a grieving old man, took advantage of his declining mental state. "This is elder abuse, Your Honor." I didn't speak. Nathan did. He stood calmly, held up the previous ruling, held up the will, the recordings, the sealed judgment. "This is harassment disguised as litigation, and there's precedent for sanctions." The judge didn't even deliberate. "Case dismissed, no grounds, no standing. Prior rulings stand." As we left, I caught a glimpse of my mother's face, but what hit harder came later. I stopped by a small grocery store near the courthouse on my way back. I just needed bread, maybe some milk. But even before I stepped into aisle 3, I heard it. "She's the one who sued her own parents, right? I heard she tricked the grandfather, wrote the will herself or something." I kept walking. It wasn't until I reached the eggs that I heard my name, soft from behind. "Clara." I turned. Miss Ellen, my old high school biology teacher, stood there. "I just wanted to say," she whispered, "he was proud of you. I heard him talk about you once before the cancer took his voice. Don't let the noise drown that out." I didn't say anything, just nodded. Back at the apartment, I sat in the dark again. I played the voicemails, one after another. Lorraine's voice. "This isn't what family does." Benjamin's tone. "You'll regret this, Clara. You'll lose everything." Even my cousin's voice crackled in. "Just drop it already. It's over. Nobody wins if you keep dragging this out." They all sounded like different shades of the same storm, each one trying to wear me down chip by chips. I curled up under. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too young for this. Maybe I'd been naive to think I could stand against people who had power, resources, and years of practiced lies. Maybe the name on the will didn't matter. But just as my thumb hovered over the power button, just as I was ready to give the silence what it wanted, I saw it again. That small velvet pouch Nathan had handed me after the hearing. I hadn't opened it. Not yet. I pulled it close. Inside, nestled in, was a single brass key and a folded slip of paper. My grandfather's handwriting. "I'd know it anywhere. If you ever feel like quitting, unlock what I left behind. It's yours because you never asked for anything." I stared at that sentence. Then I stood. I grabbed my coat, my bag, my breath. There was an address printed on the envelope Nathan had included with the pouch, a location I didn't recognize in Camden, Maine. No name, just coordinates. And suddenly I wasn't tired anymore. I wasn't doubting. I was moving. Because if they thought breaking me would be easy, they'd forgotten who made me. The tires crackled over gravel as I steered the car up the final bend. It ended at a modest A-frame cabin. I parked, stepped out. The key slid into the front door's lock. I pushed it open and was greeted by... I stood still for a long moment, not touching anything, letting the quiet settle around me. Then I remembered the pouch, the key inside. The fireplace held no fire. I ran my hand along the mantel and felt a seam. I bent down and found a small brass plate. Another keyhole. I hesitated, slid the carved pen into the lock. The back wall of the fireplace creaked inward. Behind it was a room. I stepped inside. The first drawer I opened held legal folders dated over a decade ago. Names I recognized, some I didn't. One tab read, Lorraine Bennett, Fraud Inquiry. Inside were financial records, bank transfers, doctored statements, a canceled contract with Harold's Foundation, another file. Benjamin Bennett, diversion reports. It detailed money taken from grant accounts laundered through a shell nonprofit. It was precise, damning. Then I saw it, tucked in a leather folder, the amendment to Harold's estate. It had been filed quietly, never contested. The language was clear. I had always been the heir, not by default, by design. I turned to the voice recorder. It clicked on, then Harold's voice. "Low? Steady. Nathan, if you're hearing this, she found the room. That's good. That means she's ready. They'll say she's too young, too fragile, but she's not. Clara sees things for what they are. I gave them chances. I offered them truth. They spit on it. She builds." That's why I chose her. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. I stood there a while, holding that recorder. "They forged my signature to steal millions," his voice revealed. By the time I made it back to Augusta, the courthouse was long closed. But Nathan agreed to meet me at a diner off Route 3. He slid into the seat across from me and opened his briefcase. Before he could say a word, I dropped the files between us. "I want to press charges," I said. "Fraud, theft, defamation." He blinked. "I'm done being polite." For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he nodded slowly. "Then we begin tomorrow." I shook my head. "No," I said, voice low but steady. "Tonight." I left the diner with a stack of forms in my bag and a date circled on my calendar, August 12, 2013, that Nathan said would change everything. And as I walked down, I realized something. They wrote me out of everything. Now I'm writing the rules. The stage was warm under the overhead lights. I didn't shift. I didn't blink. I stood still in my navy blazer. The Augusta Civic Center was packed. People I hadn't seen in years sat in the front rows. Neighbors, retired teachers, members of the local historical society. I adjusted the mic. "My grandfather believed in preservation, not of wealth but of dignity," I began. "He believed you measure a legacy not by what you leave behind, but who you leave it with." This wasn't about money. This was about proving I hadn't broken under the weight they'd thrown at me. I spoke of Harold's projects, his plans to restore public libraries, fund scholarships for rural high schoolers, and preserve wildlife corridors in the Kennebec Valley. I didn't mention the fight for his name. I didn't need to, and then I saw them. They entered through the side aisle. Lorraine and Benjamin trailed behind her. They didn't sit. They stood near Nathan. Standing near gave me a nod. He'd seen them too. I went on. After the closing applause, the press surged forward. I smiled and answered the first few questions. Then a young reporter stepped up. "Clara, there's been a claim tonight. Your mother says you've cut her out of the foundation, out of personal revenge, that you've rewritten your grandfather's legacy to erase her. Is that true?" "I'd like the mic," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I looked past the press, past the cameras, and locked eyes with the woman who gave birth to me. "When I was 10 years old, my parents drove me to my grandfather's farmhouse," I said. "They left me on the porch, bags packed, no goodbye, just, 'We'll be back soon.' They never came back," I said. Lorraine's jaw tensed. "I didn't isolate them from Harold's life," I continued. "They removed themselves, and when they realized what he'd left me, they tried to rewrite that too." I reached into the folder on the table beside me and pulled out a packet. I raised it slightly for the audience to see. This is a documented timeline filed years ago. It includes records of my abandonment, forged medical affidavits submitted in probate court, financial attempts to seize Harold's estate through fraudulent means. "They bribed officials to discredit me," I added, voice firm. I held the silence for one beat longer. I do not owe anyone a version of history that flatters liars. Nathan stepped forward quietly. Lorraine took a small step backward. Benjamin looked like he was waiting for a rebuttal that never came. I closed the folder and stepped down from the stage. I could breathe again. Nathan met me at, "They leaked a video," he said. "Spliced audio. We traced the original file. We know who uploaded it to the blog last week." I looked past him into frowning. I could still see them, my parents. "If they wanted a stage," I said, turning to him, "I gave them one, and I let their lies echo back louder than I ever could. I barely had time to step off the stage before Nathan caught my eye and..." "What is it now?" I asked. He tapped the screen. Video loaded. "They leaked this to Augusta Chronicle an hour ago," he said, claiming it proves Harold was mentally incompetent. I didn't speak. I just hit play, Grandpa in his recliner and me 18 at the time in 2010, my younger self joked. He grinned wide, dropped the act, and in the last 7 seconds he looked directly into the camera and said clearly, "If anyone ever tries to use this against me, you know they've got nothing left." I blinked. Nathan locked eyes with me. They cut everything after the first 30 seconds, framed it like he was sundowning. I looked down at, "Put the full version on the projector," I said. "Tonight." I stepped up to the podium. "Before we begin," I said calmly, "I want to share something personal. Some people have tried to shape my grandfather's memory to fit their shame. Let's let him speak for himself." The edited clip played first. Then, seamlessly, the rest rolled on. The joke, the laughter, the pillow, the wink, and finally the line. "If anyone ever tries to use this against me, you know they've got nothing left." Truth had arrived, and it was funny. I glanced to the back. Lorraine stood frozen. Benjamin didn't move either, but I saw his throat tighten. As the applause faded, I walked back to center stage. I reached into my blazer and pulled out the walnut pen, and I signed the launch document in front of the cameras, the donors, the town. "This pen," I said quietly, "once wrote me out of a will. Now it signs a future Harold believed in. One they tried to erase, one I'll protect." They were waiting for me. Lorraine and Benjamin stood beside her. "You said I was too young," I began. "Too soft, too easy to erase." Lorraine opened her mouth, but I stepped forward and placed 2 manila envelopes in her hand. "Cease and desist," I said. "Fraud. Liable. You'll be served formally in the morning." "But I thought you deserved the courtesy tonight," Benjamin scoffed. "You really think this gives you power?" "No," I said. "It gives me the one thing you never did. Freedom." Lorraine's hands trembled, but Nathan approached from, "Let's move," I said. "We're not giving them time to adjust." He nodded. "Already filed." As we walked toward the car, I turned once more. The house creaked a little as I opened the front door. I left my coat near the entry and made my way into Harold's study. I poured myself a cup of tea and reached for the envelope he'd tucked into the back of the drawer. The seal cracked easily. Inside was one sheet, handwritten, no lawyer speak, no dramatics, just Harold. "If you're reading this, it means I was right. They came back not because they missed me, but because they missed control. I knew they would. But I need you to know this. There was never a moment of doubt. I chose you. Always you." I leaned back in his chair, letter in hand, heart steady but full. Lorraine stopped seeing people a long time ago. She only saw mirrors, ones that reflected back what she wanted to be. And Benjamin. He knew numbers but not people. I tried with them. You know I did. But what they called love came with ledgers. You, Clara, gave without asking. You stayed when you didn't have to. You listened even when it hurt. You built things. You didn't just take them. I left them behind not because of anger, but because I couldn't let people without roots hold a future they didn't water. You were patient. You waited in its world. It doesn't reward that fast enough. So I left you more than money. I left you the cabin. I stared at it. It's not for business. It's not even for memory. It's for you. For when you need to disappear. For when the noise gets too loud again. You'll need a place that reminds you of who you are, not what they called you. I laughed softly. Of course it was. I glanced at the walnut pen on the desk. That pen had been his echo, and now it had become my compass. I folded the letter back slowly. Later that evening, I called Miss Ellen. She answered on the second ring. "Clara, everything okay? I wanted to ask you something," I said. "What if we added a scholarship to the foundation for kids who got left behind?" There was a pause. Then, "He'd like that. So would I. I didn't pack much. The pen, the letter, a sweater, my old journal. I didn't need anything else. I locked the farmhouse behind me, turned the ignition in Harold's old truck, and I arrived just before sunset in Camden, Maine, on August 15, 2013. I pulled out my journal and opened to a blank page. I pressed the pen to the paper and wrote, "I am not what they abandoned. I am what he believed in." And for the first time in my life, There wasn't anything left to fight for or against, only peace. Sometimes the loudest revenge is living like you were never broken in the first place. Yet peace came with a cost. Their lies were exposed, but the void they left in me remained, a wound that truth could only bandage, not heal.